Someone I want to see.
My friend Sherlock Holmes.
221B Baker Street.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of The Return of Sherlock Holmes, Series 1, Episode 4, The Musgrave Ritual. This, like the previous episode, is quite a small, contained story, and yet it is one of my clear favourites, and it just shows just how to make a simple story really interesting. It's worth noting that the original story featured Holmes telling Watson about this case that occurred before he met Watson. So that's something to think about when we see how well Watson is integrated into this story. It begins with a man walking determinedly towards us before he looks puzzled and wanders into the woods, then stops in a hayloft at a stables. He imagines a cavalier riding towards him until he's shaken from this vision by a woman, enticing him to do what everyone seems to do in haylofts in fiction. A second woman spots him and storms off in disgust, but this does nothing to put him off. We then cut to Holmes and Watson in a carriage far from Baker Street. Holmes is wrapped in blankets, clearly not very well, and planning to convalesce at his old school friend's home, despite not really liking his friend that much.
He's in the same college as myself. I never think of his pale, lean face and the poise of his head without associating him with grey archways, mullioned windows, and all the venerable wreckage of a feudal keep.
He also plans to go over some pre-Watson cases, much to the surprise of Watson, and a little nod to the original story. There's quite a lot of exposition here, explaining their departure from Baker Street, but it's all delivered very well, with enough character details to make it a very fun scene. We also get some detail about the man we saw in the prologue, who is not Musgrave, Holmes's friend, but Musgrave's butler, Brunton.
A young school teacher out of place.
Did he not speak several languages?
He played nearly every musical instrument. A man of considerably more intellectual ability than his master.
He is the first to greet the pair before Musgrave arrives, and, as Holmes fails at making small talk with Musgrave, Watson gets some history of the family home from Brunton. That evening, desperate to get a look at Holmes's records, Watson sneaks into his room, but leaves when he notices Holmes's habit has returned, and so sneaks out again. Watson is clearly disturbed by this for the rest of the evening, and it's an interesting choice to bring this up, and again after not having focused on it for so long. It was a part of Holmes's character, and an important reminder of how fragile his mind could be, but comes as a bit of a shock after not having seen it for so long. It causes Holmes' behaviour to be quite erratic, but Brunton too is behaving very oddly. Musgrave explains he's become something of a Don Juan since he became a widower, and was engaged to the housekeeper, Rachel, the angrier of the two women from the prologue, but has since moved on to the gamekeeper's daughter, the much less angry woman from the prologue. At breakfast the next day, Rachel is serving, but faints when Holmes asks where Brunton is, and becomes hysterical when she tells Musgrave that Brunton has gone. It's Holmes's turn to be the calm one amongst this chaos, as he smells a mystery. After investigating Brunton's room, Musgrave explains that the previous night he caught Brunton going through some of his family papers and fired him on the spot. Brunton asked to work a month's notice, but Musgrave agreed to only a week to sort out his public excuses. You could argue that this is a bit of an overreaction from Musgrave, as he freely admits Brunton was not looking through anything particularly personal, but that may just have been on this occasion, as who knows how long he's been going through Musgrave's personal items. Watson suggests that he chose to disappear in this strange way so he could do so on his own terms, but Holmes is more curious about exactly what Brunton was looking at.
It's simply a copy of the singular old observance called the Musgrave Ritual. A ceremony peculiar to our family, which each Musgrave has to go through on his coming of age.
Musgrave and Watson read it aloud for Holmes.
Whose was it?
His who is gone,
Who shall have it?
he who will come.
Where was the sun?
Over the oak,
Where was the shadow?
under the elm.
And Watson suggests it's a treasure hunt, but Musgrave says it doesn't lead anywhere. Holmes, knowing Musgrave's lack of problem-solving ability, takes on the challenge himself, but they are put off by bad weather. That evening, Rachel awakens from her stupor and runs away, clutching a bundle of something, apparently hurling herself into the lake. The next day the lake is dredged, but they only manage to come up with the bundle, which seems to contain nothing but rusted metal and pebbles. Unperturbed, Holmes picks up the Musgrave Ritual again, as he believes it's the key to all three mysteries at play here. He discovers the site of the elm tree mentioned in the ritual, which has since long been chopped down, and Musgrave is able to tell him the height of the tree, and that Brunton also asked about the height. I'm not sure this entirely works as far as the ritual goes, because the ritual is centuries old and the elm tree would have been a different height over the years, but I can forgive them for that. Thanks to some trigonometry, Holmes is able to calculate where the shadow of the elm would have fallen, proving trigonometry is useful once you've left school, just in case you have to search for treasure. And he finds Brunton made a similar mark, proving that they're on the right trail. This leads them to a doorway across the moat, which Holmes traverses like Washington crossing the Delaware. They initially find nothing until Watson reminds Holmes the ritual says "and under," which takes them to the cellar. There they find Brunton's scarf tied to a heavy stone floor panel, under which they find Brunton, dead, next to an empty box. The police are called to collect the body, and the gamekeeper's daughter accuses Rachel. Holmes remains in the cellar, annoyed he is still unable to solve the mystery. Watson provides Musgrave with a lovely description of Holmes's methods in this situation, although potentially insulting Musgrave as he does so.
I should explain Holmes' methods in such cases. He puts himself in the man's place, having first gauged his intelligence.
In this case, Brunton's intelligence is first rate.
So you see, it is unnecessary to make allowance for the personal equation.
Holmes finally reasons what happened. Unable to lift the floor panel alone, he turns to Rachel, giving her a hollow apology for his actions before asking for her help. He convinces her, the slimy devil, and returns to the cellar. With her help, he is able to prop up the panel and get in the crevice, throwing up the bundle Rachel had. The prop falls, but rather than get help, she leaves Brunton to his fate. Apparently aware she was being used, but distraught by her decision. Holmes then realises what the bundle of junk really is, as he and Watson and Musgrave return to it and give it a bit of a clean.
What is it?
Nothing less than a fragment of the ancient crown of the kings of England.
Musgrave's ancestor was a staunch royalist during the Civil War, and was the one entrusted with the crown of the kings of England, thought to have been destroyed during the Republic. I think this is a really solid episode, with an intriguing central mystery, added intrigue, and possible murder, and just the right amount of humour and levity where it's needed. It's not perfect. I think Rachel's fate should have been more ambiguous, as should her role in Brunton's death. While we only see what Holmes thinks happens, we still see it, so it's much harder to then accept that Holmes and Watson don't know. I think the ritual is complicated and vague enough that it's believable that no one else worked it out before now, and I like how much credit they give Brunton's intelligence, if not his morality. I feel like Rachel should have been a little more sympathetic, but Brunton was perfectly defined and fleshed out. The mystery is not an impressive one on repeat viewings, but the episode is still very entertaining, despite how little actually happens. I think I would have liked a little more with Musgrave and a little less of Brunton's sex life, but Musgrave has much less to do in the story anyway, so that's just personal preference. The cast do a really good job. Brunton is just as slimy as he needs to be. Musgrave is slightly dopey but very likeable, and Rachel walks a fine line of anger and fragility. The few issues I have with this episode are small complaints and personal preferences that probably wouldn't bother most people, so I think I have to give this a 5 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.